hey, fatness might not always be the fault of the person in the large body. And that is a huge part of my own implicit bias I know that I grew up with.
Sound check. Check one, check two.
Once I get away from that assumption that it's always within someone's control how big or how small their body is, then I can start to show up as a teacher who just meets the student where they are. And I don't try to encourage them in any way, shape, or form through my thoughts, actions, or anything I might say or even think that I'm not going to further harm the student or cause them to feel shame about something they may or may not have any control over. It's actually none of my business whether or not they have control over it, because again, I'm not a medical doctor. And so I can't, prescribing fitness is outside my scope of practice. Even asking someone about their body size is outside my scope of practice. Like, I'm there to talk about singing. And I don't know, I've never thought of a way that how big or how small someone's body is actually directly relevant to voice pedagogy. The presence or lack of adipose tissue in your middle of your body, how does that actually impact the function of your singing voice? I don't have an answer for that. I don't know that it does.
And I can only wonder, as a cisgender, white, middle-class male, middle-aged at that, I wonder if there's a change in our kinesthesia. I don't know. I mean, what I do know is that every human being experiences their voice physically differently. I don't think we can necessarily codify, thin, medium, fat. But I think as singing teachers, I certainly approach my practice to always place the onus back on the student to say, what are you experiencing? It's not for me to impose upon the student to say, this is what you should be feeling. I think once upon a time we thought we could, but we don't.
Yes.
We don't do that anymore. There was one thing that I was quite pleased in the second article to read, and that is I don't touch students out of practice. I haven't touched students since I started teaching. Do you know the reason why has got nothing to do with today's topic? It's got to do with the fact that I'm male, and I'm often in a studio with a female, and it's just to impose myself on someone else's body by touching it. I've just always been a hands-off teacher.
Yeah,
so
I'm the same way. Yeah.
I think it was really interesting to me to learn that this is a really important part of teaching when it comes to fat people. I'm still struggling to actually say that. It's hard.
I know. It gets easier though. I promise. Yes.
Oh dear.
Yes. No, I'm also not a touching teacher. I never have been. And that's because I was touched as a student and I hated it.
Yeah, okay.
And I trusted my teachers. Of course, I was never touched inappropriately or under any circumstances that would make me feel icky.
Yeah.
But I just didn't want my body touched.
Yeah.
I just didn't want that.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel that I could assert that. I felt like if I had said, please don't touch me, or I don't want to be touched, that it would have had major negative consequences for me, either a bad grade or disapproval or blacklisting or, she's difficult to work with.
Yeah.
And so because I was so skin crawlingly uncomfortable with being touched, as a student, I've never, ever touched my students. But through our research in this article, what we found is actually, that, people in large bodies are often pushing their bodies beyond what is comfortable anyway on any given day. It's difficult to find a chair without armrests that you can sit in at the doctor's office. And so, there's just day-to-day things where their bodies are made to feel unwelcome. And so with a person in a large body, it would be nice if their voice lesson wasn't yet another place where they are struggling and pushing their bodies beyond comfortable limits. And that's the main reason that we talked about eliminating pedagogic touching. But our other recommendation was because we found in psychology literature that folks who've experienced trauma, and that can be any kind of trauma, it can be activated or triggered by touch, even if they get consent, even if the teacher gets consent. And everybody's big on that now. Well, I'm going to ask for consent.
Yes.
Well, enthusiastic consent can only be given in an equal power dynamic.
Yeah,
and a teacher-student dynamic does not have equal
power
power.
and balance.
So that is where, and even if they were to consent, that it can still be triggering.
Yes.
It can still trigger them.
Yes.
And I, as a teacher, never want to unintentionally bring up trauma for a student of mine. That's, of course, way beyond my scope of practice. It's also just mean. Like, I want to love my students. I don't want to hurt them.
Yes.
And so, like, that's just something I don't want to do for any reason. And that's the main reason why we said you just need to retire it entirely. That is what we're saying. And we understand that's a pretty audacious point of view, and there are those who vehemently, disagree with us, and that's fine. They're welcome to disagree. But we're just presenting the information so that people can be fully informed about what it means to touch a student and what the implications could possibly be, what the consequences of that insistence that that's the only way you can teach a certain concept, or that that consent is really a little bit more nuanced than a simple yes or no.